Mercedes just destroyed the entire field in Canada with a dominant 1-2 finish, and now the FIA is reportedly looking closer at the car. That is where this story gets dangerous. Because only days ago, Formula One believed Mercedes had already been slowed down by an FIA crackdown targeting the engine system many teams suspected was helping their straight-line speed. The expectation was simple: ban the advantage, slow the car down. Instead, Mercedes came to Montreal and became even faster. George Russell on pole. Kimi Antonelli beside him. More than 3/10 clear of the next team. Max Verstappen only 7th. Ferrari completely outpaced. And the moment rival engineers saw the new Mercedes package in action, the mood inside the paddock changed instantly. Because this was not normal speed. The car looked stable everywhere. Violent braking zones. Aggressive curbs. Slow corner exits. Long straights. The Mercedes looked planted in every condition while the rest of the grid struggled to keep up. That is why people started asking questions. Questions about the radically redesigned gearbox. Questions about the rear-end stability. Questions about how Mercedes suddenly found this much performance immediately after an FIA intervention. And now the biggest fear for rival teams is no longer that Mercedes recovered from the crackdown. It is that the FIA may not have discovered the real source of their advantage yet. The first signs of trouble appeared before sprint qualifying had even finished. And almost nobody watching the broadcast noticed it. Because while fans were focused on lap times, rival engineers were focused on something much more important. How the Mercedes was generating those lap times. That is what immediately raised eyebrows inside the paddock. Not just the speed itself. The way the speed was being produced. Canada is one of the hardest circuits on the calendar to hide weaknesses. The track forces cars through violent braking zones, brutal traction points, and aggressive curb riding almost every lap. If a car has instability, Montreal exposes it instantly. But the Mercedes looked almost too comfortable. Russell attacked the braking zones aggressively. Antonelli launched out of slow corners without visible wheel spin. The rear of the car stayed calm over curbs where other teams were bouncing and correcting constantly. And that is where rival teams started becoming suspicious. Because only days earlier, Formula One expected Mercedes to lose performance after the FIA crackdown targeting the engine system many believed was helping their straight-line efficiency. Instead, the car suddenly looked even more complete. That is not normal after a technical intervention. Usually, when the FIA removes a suspected advantage, teams need time to recover balance. They lose confidence. The car becomes inconsistent. Engineers scramble to understand new weaknesses. Mercedes showed none of that. They looked prepared immediately. And according to the report, they arrived in Montreal with their biggest upgrade package of the season. That package included a radically redesigned gearbox. Smaller. Lighter. More compact internally. Now, on paper, that sounds harmless. But in Formula One, packaging changes can affect almost every part of the car. Weight distribution, rear suspension behavior, cooling efficiency, aerodynamics, ride stability. One small mechanical redesign can create performance gains everywhere else. And that is exactly why rival teams started looking closer. Because the Mercedes suddenly behaved differently in all the areas that matter most around Montreal. Under braking, the rear stayed stable. Over curbs, the car stayed composed. Out of slow corners, traction looked incredibly clean. And on long straights, the Mercedes still looked extremely efficient despite the FIA crackdown. That combination created immediate tension inside the paddock. Because Formula One teams understand something casual viewers usually do not. When one area of a car improves dramatically, engineers immediately ask what hidden system is allowing that improvement to happen. And this is where the suspicion started spreading. The report also mentions aerodynamic changes around the side pods and floor designed to improve airflow toward the diffuser. That sounds technical, but the effect is simple. Better airflow creates a more stable rear platform. A more stable rear platform allows drivers to brake later and accelerate earlier. And suddenly every corner becomes easier to attack. That is exactly what Russell and Antonelli were doing all Friday. But here is what made rival teams truly uncomfortable. Mercedes did not look like a team experimenting with a risky setup. They looked completely confident. Russell openly said the upgraded car felt fantastic after qualifying. Toto Wolff said the package worked exactly as expected. Exactly as expected. That wording matters. Because it suggests Mercedes already understood the performance level before arriving in Canada. And in Formula One, confidence like that usually means months of preparation happened behind the scenes long before the public ever noticed. That is why rival engineers immediately began studying every visible detail on the car. Not because Mercedes won, but because of how they won. The car looked too balanced. too efficient, too stable immediately after a major FIA intervention that was supposed to hurt them. And once that idea started spreading through the garages, the atmosphere around Mercedes changed completely. This was no longer just a fast weekend. Now people wanted to know whether Mercedes had discovered another gray area inside the regulations before everyone else did. Then sprint qualifying finally began. And within minutes, the situation exploded. Because this was supposed to be the moment Mercedes came back to reality. Instead, they became even more dominant. George Russell took sprint pole with a 1 minute 12.965. Kimi Antonelli locked out the front row just 0.068 behind him. But the truly shocking part was the gap behind them. Lando Norris, the closest non-Mercedes driver, was more than 3/10 slower. Ferrari was over 4/10 back. Max Verstappen could only manage 7th place. In modern Formula One, that kind of advantage immediately creates suspicion. Not because dominance itself is illegal, but because teams know how difficult it is to suddenly gain this much performance in such a tightly packed field. And this is where the paddock atmosphere reportedly changed completely. Because rival engineers were no longer just studying lap times. They were studying behavior. How the Mercedes reacted over curbs. How stable it looked under braking. How quickly it rotated through slow corners. How efficiently it accelerated onto the straights despite the FIA crackdown that was expected to hurt them badly. And the more laps they watched, the more uncomfortable the situation became. Because the Mercedes looked almost too complete. Usually, fast cars still show weaknesses somewhere. Maybe they overheat the tires. Maybe they bounce aggressively over curbs. Maybe the rear becomes unstable during heavy braking. Maybe the drivers constantly fight the steering wheel to hold the car together. The Mercedes showed almost none of those problems in Montreal. That is what immediately fueled speculation inside the garages. And this is where one specific detail became extremely important: the redesigned gearbox. According to the report, Mercedes introduced a smaller and lighter gearbox with internal modifications designed to improve power transfer efficiency. Now, for casual fans, that might sound like a normal technical update. But Formula One engineers know packaging changes can create hidden aerodynamic gains very quickly. Imagine shrinking a large backpack while running through a crowded hallway. Suddenly you move cleaner, faster, more efficiently, because everything around you has more space to flow naturally. That is basically what happens with airflow inside a Formula One car. A more compact gearbox can completely change how air travels toward the rear of the car. And if that airflow becomes cleaner, rear stability improves dramatically. That is exactly what rival teams appeared to notice in Canada. The Mercedes rear end looked unbelievably calm. Russell attacked braking zones without hesitation. Antonelli carried huge confidence through direction changes. The car absorbed curbs smoothly while other teams struggled with instability. And suddenly engineers started connecting the dots. Because the report also mentions aerodynamic improvements around the side pods and floor area, specifically designed to optimize airflow toward the diffuser. That combination immediately became the center of attention. Smaller gearbox, reworked airflow, better rear stability, stronger acceleration zones, and all of it appearing immediately after an FIA intervention targeting another area of the car. That timing alone was enough to trigger suspicion. Because in Formula One, when one advantage disappears and another appears instantly, rival teams start asking whether the second advantage was already being developed quietly behind the scenes. And the pressure inside the paddock intensified even further because of one uncomfortable reality. Mercedes drivers did not look surprised by the performance. Russell openly admitted the car felt fantastic after taking pole. Antonelli sounded calm and confident despite narrowly missing first place. Toto Wolff said the package performed exactly as expected. Not unexpectedly. Not luckily. Exactly as expected. That is the kind of statement rival teams remember very carefully. Because it suggests Mercedes already knew this package could dominate before the weekend even started. And now the biggest fear inside the paddock is becoming impossible to ignore. What if the FIA crackdown never touched the real source of Mercedes' performance at all? And this is where the situation becomes genuinely dangerous for Formula One. Because once suspicion enters the paddock, everything changes. Teams stop looking only at their own cars. Now they start hunting for hidden explanations inside everyone else's performance. And after the Canadian sprint qualifying session, Mercedes suddenly became the center of that attention. Not just because they locked out the front row. Because of how effortless it looked. That is what disturbed rival engineers the most. The Mercedes did not appear nervous. It did not look like a car operating on the limit of control. Russell and Antonelli were attacking corners aggressively while the car stayed calm underneath them. And in Formula One, calm cars are terrifying. Because calm usually means the drivers still have margin left. Think about it like watching two people sprint. One looks exhausted, fighting every step. The other looks smooth, relaxed, almost comfortable while moving faster. Which one scares you more? That second version was Mercedes in Canada. And this is where the investigation rumors started gaining momentum inside the paddock. Because rival teams reportedly began asking whether the combination of the redesigned gearbox and the new aerodynamic layout was creating performance gains larger than expected. Not necessarily illegal on the surface. But Formula One has always operated in gray areas. Teams constantly search for interpretations that technically follow the rules while still exploiting hidden advantages. That is the entire history of the sport. Double diffusers, flexible wings, mass dampers, ride height systems. The biggest Formula One breakthroughs often begin the exact same way. One team suddenly becomes much faster. Everyone else becomes suspicious. Then the FIA starts looking closer. And the reason Mercedes attracted so much attention in Canada is because the timing felt almost impossible. Remember what the paddock expected before the weekend started. The FIA crackdown was supposed to hurt Mercedes' performance immediately. Most people believed the silver cars would lose straight-line efficiency and become vulnerable again. Instead, they looked more complete than at any point this season. That contradiction is what triggered alarm across the garages. Because rival engineers understand something casual fans often overlook. Real Formula One performance does not usually arrive overnight unless multiple systems suddenly start working together perfectly. And Mercedes looked exactly like that. The report describes changes to the gearbox, chassis weight, aerodynamic flow structures, and MGUK deployment. Now imagine all of those systems interacting simultaneously. A lighter rear section improves balance. Better airflow stabilizes the diffuser. Improved stability allows later braking. Cleaner traction improves acceleration. Smarter energy deployment boosts exits onto straights. Each improvement multiplies the next one. And suddenly a car that was merely competitive becomes dominant. That is what rival teams appeared to fear most in Montreal. Not one illegal trick. A complete technical breakthrough. And if that is true, the FIA investigation rumors become even more important. Because Formula One regulators are not only searching for direct rule violations. Sometimes they investigate whether a team has discovered an interpretation that could force future rule clarifications. That is where things become politically explosive. Especially when championships are involved. And right now, Mercedes suddenly has momentum everywhere. Russell just answered Antonelli's championship lead with pole position. Antonelli still looks unstoppable across race pace. Toto Wolff sounds calm and confident. And rival teams are running out of time to respond. That combination creates pressure fast inside Formula One. Because if Mercedes truly unlocked a new performance window in Canada, then the rest of the season may have changed completely in a single weekend. And the most uncomfortable possibility for Red Bull, Ferrari, and McLaren is this. What if Mercedes is still only at the beginning of understanding this package?